I was choking on something, and I gagged too. There were tubes in my nose, in my throat, sensors beeping all around me. I had no idea where I was, and I couldn't move anything on my body. But my eyes worked, and I could see my father in the corner of the room, bags under his eyes, hadn't shaved. You could tell he'd been under duress. The first words out of my mouth, "How did I do in the game?" After a long pause, my father spoke through tired eyes. "Son, you didn't play. You broke your neck." That's when I realized I had died. That's when I realized my dreams were shattered. But that's how I came alive to my deep need for purpose. Well, my name is Micah, and I have the privilege of serving alongside over 570 team members who right now, are advancing the gospel and serving the poor in some of the poorest places on planet Earth. And I actually brought one of our team members here with me today, my brother Elaine. Will you stand up? He's our vice president of International Profit Centers. And I can honestly say on behalf of Elaine, myself, our global teams, my family, that we are incredibly honored to be here at Reverb today. Hey, I was in worship, and you guys were on fire. I think a lot of y'all are glad to be in the house today as well. If that's you, if you're glad to be at church, will you just turn to your neighbor and say, "It's good to see you at Reverb today." Now, Pastor Brian, I can't see on the other side of that camera. I know there's some people on the couch or in the coffee shop, but here in the room, most of y'all had two neighbors. And for some reason, you chose one over the other. So you got to turn to your second choice, and you got to say, "You look like you could use some church." So this is my first time here, and it truly is an honor. And naturally, being my first time, I haven't had the privilege of meeting you. Many of you all new faces. And though that's true, I still know that we have at least two things in common. Number one, you and I both share admiration and respect for your pastor. Pastor Brian, your heart for the Lord, your heart for people, man, it is legit. Hey, 10 years of service here at this house, 10-year anniversary. Will you join me in just honoring your pastor, Miss Renee, your staff? Come on, thank you for your service. We love you. Hey, look, I speak all over the country and the churches in different states all over. And I'm just telling you, y'all have something unique going. Fight for it. And you have pastors that love you, and that's across the board. And I just want to encourage you, stay true to the purpose, the vision of the house. Praise God, best is yet to come. So I knew we had that in common, but I also I believe that we have something else in common. I'll bet that you, like me, want to live a meaningful life. You see, I believe that we were actually wired by God to walk a purpose-filled path. But there's a problem. A wide road sits in front of each of us, and at every turn, it begs us to waste our lives. And most walk into the grave void of purpose. But my bet is you're different, right? Like you're here, you're in the house, pen and pad, in part because you want to do it different. You're committed to a life that matters. And so I'm here this morning really to spur you on. And I want to do so by offering two truths and a talk we'll call this morning, Simply Dying for Purpose. So if you're a note taker this morning, I want to offer value. And so I want to encourage you, whether you're taking shots of the screen or you're just leaning in, or maybe you got that pen and pad, I want to encourage you. I want to equip you. I want to help you walk into that life that will matter the moment you leave this life. Well, the reality is that good times often follow bad moments, right? You've got the chill at night, and then you have the warmth of dawn, right? And I say that because our first truth this morning, it may hit like bad news. It may shock you at first, but hang on, good's coming. We have to start with the first truth, though. First truth, first principle is simply this: death precedes purpose. Death precedes purpose. Your plan for your life, my plan for my life, it produces something: death. In Proverbs, he says it this way. He says, there is a path before each person that seems right, but it ends in death. Jesus in the New Testament, he had a masterful way of taking heavenly truths and helping them stick on earth. And he did that in part by using analogies and illustrations. Because they were in an agricultural society, he would often draw from the farm. And so he'd gathered his disciples together, and he was speaking in part to this very point that we're talking about. And we pick it up in John, and he says this. He says, very truly I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat, what? Falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. You see, if a seed doesn't die, it withers. It fades alone, right? In order to walk in its life-giving purpose, in order to walk in the fullness that God intended for it, it's counterintuitive, but it has to die. But now, I don't know how many farmers are here. I didn't have the privilege of working on a farm, but you don't have to understand the basic principles, right? The farmer digs a hole in the ground, takes the seed, drops it in, you cover it with earth. It goes through a dying process, right? It germinates, and then from it yield can come, purpose can come, life can come. Come on. But we resist the dying, don't we? Yeah. That's right. Wow. And what do you get? He tells us. It remains alone, unfulfilled. It ends its existence in a pitiful spot. His point, to live beyond itself, it must first die to self. And so it is with a woman, a man, any person. A life dedicated to self ends with self. And yet culture says, do you? And I was all about me. My gain, my glory, my agenda. Looking back, if you were to ask me, hey, Micah, what were your goals for your life? I could actually sum it up in 2 words: assets and accolades. Right? I wanted the dough, I wanted the coin, I wanted the money, right? The American dream. But I wanted the fame, I wanted the glory, I wanted ESPN, here I come. Yeah. And my ticket was ball. I love me some ball. How many athletes do we have in the house this morning? No, pardon me, I can actually see pretty good. How many former athletes do we have in the house this morning? Man, I pitched and played shortstop, played point guard, played quarterback, free safety. My father was an athletic director, head football coach, coached high school football for 18 years. Did I tell anybody in here I love me some ball? I was that little grass rat, right? That kid that grew up on the sidelines and in the gym. I love some ball. I would actually sleep with the ball. I thought the pig skin, would loosen up my hands at night. I wanted to be a light-skinned Deion Sanders. I'm just going to shoot y'all straight. Primetime +1. And my father, he could see this passion for a game had become idolatry. And that can happen, right? We can exchange what we do for whose we are, right? And my father, he came up to me after a practice, and he could see me in this space, and he said, son, he said, life isn't about a game. He said, God made you on purpose for his purpose, and success is selling out to God's plan for your life. Good advice. But it offended me. and it crystallized an internal tension. I wanted to captain the ship. I wouldn't have verbalized it this way at the time, but the truth is I wanted Jesus to be Savior and Micah be Lord. Wow. So this wrestling match ensued, and it was a big football game coming up, and Thursday night got to about 2 a.m., and I finally stand up in my room, and I said, God, this is my life. This is what I want to do with my life. Just leave me alone. Well, not too long after that, we went down to catch some waves, and we loved some surfing. But I'm talking about like West Coast surfing. I'd grown up in San Diego, lived on the West Coast, picked up surfing in Southern California, and we had moved out to this beachside community on the Gulf of Mexico. I don't know if you all know it, but there's a big lake out there, a big pond. We call it the Gulf of Mexico. Well, the only time you can ride waves out there is when the hurricanes kick up surf. We thought it would be a good idea to go ride. And so there's this huge beach break. My brother and I, we're always competitive. We're racing to see who can get down to the water. And I'm running down that beach as fast as I can. And I can see this wave. It's reforming. And it's about to crash on the beach. And so running full tilt, I come and I jump and I dive into that wave just like I had 100 times before. Only this time when I hit the water, something happened. It was like a shock just raced through my body. Instinctively, I knew to lay still, but the momentum of the dive kind of carried me through the water. I remember being like face down and like knowing something's off. I'm kind of groggy, and the next wave, it rolls me over, and I can see the surface. I can see the air. But when I tried to get up, my body wouldn't work. Panic begins to course through my veins. My lungs are screaming for breath. I can't move. In a last-ditch effort, I put my lips together, but instead of oxygen, I caught water, and I passed out. My brother had seen me dive in, and he didn't think anything was wrong, so he got his clothes off, went to get the football. A few moments pass, and he starts to get curious, so he actually walks out to the place I dove in, looks, nothing. He thinks maybe I'm joking, so he actually leaves, begins to look in the bushes, and then nothing. So my parents, they had dropped us off, parked the car, they make their way down, and by the time they find my brother, it's frantic. And then, a mother's worst nightmare. My mom hit the beach, and at the top of her lungs, began to scream, God, 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 don't take my son. 5 to 7 minutes had passed. A stranger about 150 yards down the beach was standing in a slack pool of water, and he was lifting an arm on a corpse. My brother, he ran over and grabbed my mom. My father, he ran down the beach and pulled my body out of the surf. No heartbeat, no pulse, flatline, blue. My brother grabbed my mom. They ran to the nearest house, called 911, EMTs, defibrillators, helicopter. I don't remember much of the first week, but I remember choking on something, and I gagged too. Tubes in my nose, in my throat. That's when I realized I had died. That's when I realized my dreams were shattered. But that's how I came alive to my deep need for purpose. You see, the truth of the matter is my lust for my life, my way, it needed to die. And God knew that long before I did. And he had spoke to his disciples a message that was true for me then and is true for us today when he had said very clearly in Matthew, if you try to hang on to your life, your will, your plan, your path, your way, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. You see, the cleanse my heart, O God, question that we must continually ask as believers is something like this. What in my life needs to die? And the only posture that makes sense before the King of Kings, The only posture that makes sense before the one who spoke and galaxies were formed. The only posture that makes sense before the one who breathed life into your bones, who knit you together in your mother's womb, who commands angel armies, and who sent his son to pay for our sin debt. The only posture that makes sense before the King of Kings and Lord of Gods, who reigns sovereign over time and space. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. The encouragement at this point, the takeaway, the truth that I want to leave with you is simply this. Let life's author write your script. You see, when we begin to lay it down, when we begin to die to ourselves, then we can rise. Then we can actually enter into what is the true good life. Because yes, death precedes purpose. But purpose produces life. Purpose is the substance of life. Purpose gives you a right to take up oxygen. Purpose is the reason that you and I still have breath in our lungs. Purpose gets you out of bed. Purpose is God's fuel. Purpose is the reason that he still has you here. Purpose is where it gets good. Purpose gives context to abundant living. Purpose produces life. You know what's crazy is when we look back at John 12, we actually see that this is where Jesus was going with all the dying. He actually says, I tell you the truth, unless a kernel of wheat is planted in the soil and dies, it remains alone. But what? But its death will what? Produce many new kernels, a plentiful harvest of what? New lives. Christ has always been about a death that leads to life. The resurrection follows the dying. And here's the crazy thing. The evil one would seek to convince us, the liar who appears as an angel of light, would seek to convince you and I every day that our plan doesn't only seem right, it is right and it is the way. But what he's doing is he's selling us something that will fail us. The reality is, in God's economy, in God's kingdom, it's not even a good trade. What do I mean by that? I mean, think about what we get and what we give. So we exchange our plan that leads to death for his purpose, which produces life. Now, in my simple accounting, that's a good trade. We are laying it down so we can pick it up. We are giving inferior so we can get superior. The question is, do you and I believe that his purpose is better than our plan? All right, now I'm going to ask you a question. Healthy Spouse Club, you got to be honest. We're in church, right? No poking, no beating up your neighbor. But if you are in the Healthy Spouse Club like me, right, you married a healthy spouse, just raise your hand here. We love you, healthy spouses. All right, Healthy Spouse Club. All right, Healthy Spouse Club. Good. Well, I entered marriage on like a steady diet of like Mountain Dew and Reese's peanut butter cups. That was pretty much my straight up golden diet, right? Now, my bride, on the other hand, she entered, our marriage like eating pine nuts and tree bark. You guys, y'all, I think she came out of the woods right into the kitchen, right? And so 10 years after being married, we had our first, and naturally, you can imagine what the kids are eating, right? Yep, kale and seaweed bites, right? That's how we roll. Actually, I got a picture of my family. My bride, Miss Audrey, is the absolute best. I outpunted my coverage. I love this girl so much. I can't believe that 16 years later, she's still hanging out with me, but I just absolutely adore her. And then we have a little grace gift given Gracia. She's 3 years of age. And then we have a peace arrow, Amani. He is now 6. And so we were thinking about this food plan thing, or I should say I was thinking about it. She'd already decided it. But one day I was thinking about this food plan, and I was just thinking, maybe my son's being deprived of, all these good things. And so I got some confidence in my step, and I got kind of bold, and I was like, I'm man of the house. I should have some say in the food plan, right? No. Wrong. But on that particular day, something rose up in me, and I got bold, and I started walking towards the kitchen. I could see my son Arrow sitting by the little bench by the table, and I was assuming my wife wasn't around, but I wasn't quite sure because she could be around the corner. But anyways, I was bold, right? And so I'm walking to that kitchen. I'm walking towards Arrow. But I was bold, right? I was confident. And then I looked at Arrow, and with just command in my voice, I stood tall and I said, shh. Daddy's got something for you. It's called a Twinkie. And he said no. Stuck on his plan, he missed Daddy's good purpose. How often do we settle for familiar and miss God's best? Purpose produces life. Exchanging your dream for his plan isn't sacrifice. It's smart. Purpose gave life to all those we look up to. We just look at the Old Testament and we see it on display, right? You have Noah, construction for the kingdom, puts together an ark, rescues humanity. You have David, leadership gifts civically for united movement, restoring the northern and southern kingdom, bringing about the kingdom of God. You move into the New Testament and look at Paul, a man who did not disconnect his Sunday from his Monday, who understood his gifting and his breath tied to what God desired to do. And so it was natural for Paul to say things like we see him say in Acts when he says, but my life is worth nothing to me unless I use it for purpose, finishing the work assigned me by the Lord. And you see him communicate, reverberate this same concept in reverse order in Romans. Look what he does. He says, give yourselves completely to God. So in other words, all in on the purpose that God has. For you were what? There is a path that seems right. But now you have new life, purpose, life. Alive for God's purpose. You see, Christ's death saves our souls, but it's God's purpose that fuels our lives. And for me, I had to die to come alive to God's purpose. But death, if you survive it, has a way of changing how you live. Amen. And God began to open my heart. He began to help me see things that were always before me. I began to see in God's word his heart for the lost. Jesus came to seek and to save the lost, and then he calls the found to join him on mission, go make disciples in all nations. But God began to open my heart to his heart for the poor. Did you know in the Bible, in the scriptures, over 2,000 times he calls his people to care for the poor, the hurting, the down and out? So before me, there was this great mandate, go make disciples, and this great command, love your neighbor, care for the poor. And I began to ask God, show me how to walk this out. Show me how to live in a way that would matter in the lives of others and bring you glory. Show me how to connect the dots. We were doing inner city ministry, serving in underprivileged communities, but I was also learning about what's called extreme poverty. How many of you all have ever been in extreme poverty or know what that means technically? Okay, so extreme poverty is defined as trying to survive on less than $1.90 a day. Hard to relate, huh? And I'm thankful that we can't relate. But I want to try to take you there for a moment. And since the jumbo jet isn't outside, can y'all bow your heads for a moment? Just kind of close your eyes for a quick moment. And I want to ask you a couple questions. Imagine what your life would look like if you were doing your budget on $1.90 a day. What would your house look like? What would your streets look like? What would your cupboard look like? Okay, open your eyes. Welcome to the slums. 2005, I flew over and I spent a month living amongst people in what's called extreme poverty. The slum had over 300,000 human beings. Human beings. Men and women, boys and girls, endowed with the dignity of God. No less important to him than my son is. And all of a sudden, in the course of that time, statistics became names and faces, and poverty started to become personal. I could no longer look at it as a distant reality. I went to a lady's house named Velma. Her entire home, maybe 12 by 14. I'm standing in Velma's home, porous roof, like the rain would come through it, tin siding. And she tells me that 12 people are sleeping there. Dirt floor, all their earthly belongings in there. And I look at Velma and I say, Velma, how's that possible? She says, my brother died of AIDS. My sister died of AIDS. We inherited their kids. She points to this little soiled bed in the corner of the room, and she said, my husband and I sleep here, one child to the right, one child to the left, one child we lay across our feet. She pointed to this little makeshift rickety table across the dirt floor, and she said, we lay 3 kids across this table each night. She pointed to this bench along the tin siding, and she said, the rest of the kids sleep arms crossed, and we rotate because the bed is the best night's sleep. And in my ears were the 2,000 times God had begged his people to care for the poor. And before my eyes were precious people that I could no longer pretend didn't exist. And I knew coming back from that I was going to spend the rest of my life trying to forget what I saw, or spend the rest of my life trying to do something about it. And my life and purpose began to connect. So I came back and I dropped out of grad school. I moved in my car. I lived homeless for about 8 months, and during that period, God crystallized the vision, and you can actually see the vision playing out on the screen before you. So he gave us this dream. What if we could go into these communities and begin to do incarnational ministry, come alongside locals, raise them up, empower them, create spaces where we could do relevant disciple-making ministry, use their sport, raise people up. But the centers would also be a hub where we have poverty alleviating, real-time human services, social services. This was this crazy dream that was so big that it only could be from God. And so we went all in, and because of amazing churches that stayed on mission like you, that begin to support the mission today, these dreams are working realities. 16 years later, today as I stand here, hundreds of thousands of people on a weekly basis are being served. Indigenous people are making disciples and transforming their local environments. Spiritual lives are being transformed, but physical lives are being changed. Is food, water, education, and health service are transforming lives. And by the grace of God, small businesses are creating employment and localized products. And poverty is being alleviated. Lives are being transformed because churches are staying on mission like yours. An entity like ours are giving you a way to express yourself into the nations. And local people on the ground are rising up and changing their dynamics. And God is getting great glory as purpose is producing life. Yes. And as you stand here, your arms through partners like us are reaching there. And check out some of the impact that is happening around the world as purpose is producing life. Isn't God great?
Yeah, come on.
Isn't he good? I don't know about you, but I don't want to go back to the way that seemed right. There is just too much beauty, too much good, too much glory for him, too much eternal reward, too much treasure being laid up, too much transformation to behold now, to settle in for the inferior. And so with that in mind, I want to encourage you this morning. I want to spur you on. Life at the end of the day is like a vapor. And it's just too short to live disconnected from purpose. Don't waste your life on things that will not matter when it's over. Your takeaway, my word of encouragement, my heartfelt plea is live a life that outlives this life. You see, at the end of the day, God invites every one of us to come alive to the very thing we're all dying for: purpose. And I recognize in a gathering like this, we've all walked into this space coming from different places. And I would submit to you this morning that there's really two groups of people in the room. The first, many of you have walked in here having a relationship with Jesus Christ. You're a Christian, you're a follower. And I want to just simply leave you with this. This is a shot in the arm this morning. This is just a word of encouragement. But I want to just leave you with this. You have one life. It is a vapor. So run hard and stay the course. Well done. Rest on the backside of the purpose-filled path.
Come on. So good.
But I imagine that there's others that are kicking the tires on this church thing. You're exploring Jesus. You're new maybe to some of this. Maybe you had a bad experience. Maybe you're coming back. Maybe Jesus is just new, and I got a word for you. First, we are so glad you're here. This house was built with you in mind. You are welcome. This is a safe place. Thank you for gracing us with your presence. But you're at a crossroads, and there's a path in front of you. And at the trailhead of that path stands a cross. And the one who hung, bled, and died, he did so on purpose. He did so for a purpose. For you. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him would not perish but have everlasting life. If you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart the Lord Jesus, that God has raised him from the dead, you will be saved. And so this morning, I offer you Jesus. I invite you this morning to take his hands. I ask you this morning to step to Jesus. Every head bowed, every eye closed. In the safety of this moment, no one looking around, I want to give you a chance to call out to him. And in a moment, I'm going to pray with you. And I would love to know who I'm praying with. So if you're here this morning and you'd say, I'm ready to give my life to Jesus, will you just boldly slip your hand in the air? Slide it up. Yes. Slip that hand up. Today is the day. Raise it high. Let me see you. Let me see you. Online, around the room. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. No magic words. It's a heart yielded to him, but offer something like this. God, I need you. I confess I've been going my own way. I believe you died and rose again. And today, I place my trust in you. I turn from my path and I choose to follow you. Amen.